The call came at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and I almost didn't hear it over the rain hammering my kitchen window. I'd been sitting at the table going through my old tool catalogs, the kind of mindless thing I do when I can't sleep, which happens more nights than not since I turned 67. My phone buzzed against the wood and I picked it up without looking, expecting my son checking in the way he sometimes does when he works late. It wasn't him. It was my daughter-in-law. The message was 3 words. I fell. Ridgeline. I was pulling on my boots before I finished reading it. Ridgeline Road cuts along the back edge of our county, a 2-lane stretch that runs between old farm property and the edge of Dalton Creek Woods. Nobody drives it at night unless they're cutting through to the highway or they grew up knowing every pothole by memory, the way my son does, the way he taught Maya to when they first started spending time out here. I grabbed my raincoat off the hook by the back door and my heavy flashlight from the shelf above it, and I was in my truck and moving before I let myself think about what those 3 words actually meant. She hadn't written I had an accident. She hadn't written my car slid. She'd written I fell. And she was 4 months pregnant. The rain was coming sideways by the time I turned onto Ridgeline. My headlights hit the road in sheets, and I drove slow, leaning forward over the wheel the way my own father used to do in weather, like getting closer to the windshield would help you see farther. I spotted her car first, pulled half onto the gravel shoulder with the hazards on, driver's door hanging open. I stopped 20 yards behind it, left my engine running and my lights aimed at her vehicle, and got out. She was sitting on the ground between her car and the tree line, her back against a fence post, her knees pulled up as far as they could go with her stomach the way it was now. She had one hand pressed flat against the post like she needed it to stay upright. Her hair was soaked through and plastered against the side of her face. I crossed the distance between us at a jog and got down on one knee in front of her. I'm here, I said. I've got you. Can you tell me where you're hurt? She looked up at me, and her eyes were clear, which was the first relief I'd felt since I read her message. No confusion, no vacancy. She was present. She was with me. My ankle, she said. I twisted it getting out of the car. I slipped on the gravel. She paused and pressed her lips together. I didn't hit my head. I didn't fall hard. I just couldn't get back up and my phone was almost dead. The baby? I think she's okay. I didn't land on my stomach. I went sideways. She touched her abdomen with her free hand, carefully, the way she'd been doing since her first trimester. This quiet, checking-in gesture I'd noticed from the beginning. I need to get to the hospital. I need them to check. We're going right now, I said. I helped her up with her arm across my shoulders and walked her to my truck, slow and careful. Her bad ankle lifted slightly off the ground. She winced twice, but didn't make a sound beyond that. She'd always been like that, quiet about her own pain in a way that took some getting used to. My son said it was something she'd learned young, which was its own kind of sentence. Once she was in the passenger seat with the heat going and a blanket from behind my seat pulled around her shoulders, I texted my son. He was in Nashville for a 2-day work conference, and I knew what that message was going to do to him. But he needed to know before I told him anything else, so I kept it simple. Maya's okay. We're going to the hospital. Ankle and precaution. Start driving when you're ready. Then I pulled a careful U-turn on the narrow road and headed for County General. They took her back quickly when they heard about the pregnancy. I sat in the waiting area with a paper cup of coffee that tasted like warm cardboard, and I stared at my phone and tried to think clearly. I called her name over and over in my head the whole drive. Maya, my daughter-in-law. The woman my son had called me about 2.5 years ago, voice doing that thing where he tries to sound casual but can't quite manage it, saying there was someone he wanted me to meet, and she was unlike anyone he'd ever known. And could they come out to the house that weekend? She'd shown up in a yellow jacket with a casserole dish covered in foil and a laugh that filled the whole kitchen. And by the time they left Sunday evening, I understood exactly what he meant. Her mother is Korean-American, grew up in California. Her father is from Kentucky, retired schoolteacher. Good man I've had supper with 4 or 5 times now. She grew up in both worlds, without belonging entirely to either one, she'd told me once. And she said it without self-pity, just as a fact she'd made her peace with. She has my son's same stubbornness and his same loyalty, which is why they work. When she became my daughter-in-law, she became my family in the way that matters, the kind that isn't about paperwork. She'd been on Ridgeline Road at midnight in the rain because she'd had dinner with her college friend who lives 20 minutes east of us, and she'd taken the back way home out of habit. That much I understood. What I didn't understand yet was what happened to her before she drove out there. The doctor came out 40 minutes later and told me the baby was fine, heart rate strong and steady, and that Maya had a minor sprain in her right ankle. Nothing broken, nothing to worry about. She wanted to keep her another hour for observation given the pregnancy, and then Maya would be free to go home with instructions to stay off that ankle for a few days. I exhaled something I'd been holding since I first read her message. My son walked through the automatic doors at 1 in the morning, jacket soaked through from the parking lot, his face doing the controlled panic thing he's done since he was a teenager, the thing where he's terrified but he won't let himself show it until he knows, for certain. I stood up and put my hand on his shoulder. "She's fine," I said. "The baby's fine. Go see her." He went. I stayed in the waiting room and drank another cup of the bad coffee. And I thought about what she'd said in the truck on the way here. The things she'd said quietly, almost like she wasn't sure she was going to say it at all. I'd asked her, once she'd stopped shaking from the cold, why she was out there so late. Her friend's dinner typically ended by 9, and she'd been quiet for a moment, looking at the road through the windshield, and then she'd said, "I drove around for a while, after." "After what?" I asked. She'd turned and looked at me with an expression I didn't have a name for right then, something between exhaustion and a decision. "After I left your sister's house," she said. I kept my eyes on the road. "She called me this afternoon," Maya continued. "She said she needed to speak with me privately about something important. She asked me to come to her house before dinner, said it would only take 20 minutes. She paused. I should have known better, but I thought maybe she was finally going to try. My older sister lives in a restored Victorian on the north end of town that she treats like a monument to herself. She has lived alone in it since her husband left 12 years ago, and she has filled the silence with opinions about other people's choices. She is 71 years old and has spent her whole life arranging the world into categories of acceptable and unacceptable, and she has never once questioned which column she belongs in. She and I have had words about Maya before. Twice since my son and daughter-in-law got married, and once, the worst time, when the pregnancy was announced. My sister had used the word diluted in my presence, and I had told her very specifically what she could do with that word, and every word like it, and we hadn't spoken much in the 2 months since. So when Maya told me my sister had called her, alone, privately, I felt something go cold in my chest that had nothing to do with the rain outside. "What did she say to you?" I asked. Maya was quiet for long enough that I glanced at her. "She said the baby would be a mistake that couldn't be undone," she said. Her voice was level. That quiet about pain thing again. She said my son deserved a family that fit together. She said that what I was carrying wasn't a blessing, it was a complication. She looked down at her hands in her lap. She said those words very carefully, like she'd chosen them ahead of time. I pulled into the hospital parking lot without saying anything. I helped her out of the truck without saying anything. And I sat in that waiting room for an hour, turning those words over in my mind like stones, examining each one, understanding that my sister had not said them carelessly. She had prepared them. She had invited my daughter-in-law to her house, and prepared those words, and delivered them to a pregnant woman who had done nothing to her except exist in a way she didn't approve of. My son came and found me just before 2 in the morning and sat down in the chair next to mine. He was calmer now, the controlled panic replaced by the quiet that comes after relief. "She told me," he said. "I know. Dad." He said it in a particular way. The way he said it when he was 17 and had worked something out and was waiting to see if I'd worked it out too. "I know," I said again. We drove Maya home together, my son's car following my truck, and I got her settled on the couch with her ankle propped up and ice on it, and I told them both to get some sleep and that I'd come by in the morning. My son walked me to the door, and we stood on the porch for a moment. "I want to handle this," he said. "You will," I said. "But let me look at a few things first." He studied my face. He's known me long enough to understand what that means. "Don't do anything that costs you anything," he said. "I won't." I drove home in the rain, and I didn't sleep. My sister is not a stupid woman. She is, in many ways, a careful one. What she does through channels. She makes phone calls. She has conversations. She uses the social architecture of a small Tennessee county the way a contractor uses a blueprint. She knows which boards to sit on, which names to drop, which version of a story to tell, and to whom. She has spent 50 years building influence the way other people build savings, slowly and deliberately. And I had been watching her do it my entire life. The next morning I drove to her house. She answered the door in her robe, which meant she'd seen my truck through the window and had decided to receive me as someone not worth getting dressed for. An old move of hers. "I figured you'd come," she said. "Then you know why I'm here." She stepped back and let me into the front hallway without warmth. The house smelled like fresh flowers and old wood the way it always does. She led me to the sitting room and sat in her chair by the window and folded her hands. "What she told you is a version of events," my sister said. "It's her version, and I believe her. She's sensitive. I was simply expressing concern. You told a pregnant woman that her baby was a complication." My sister looked out the window. "I told her the truth that no one else in this family is willing to say, that this child is going to grow up between two worlds and belong fully to neither, and that's not fair to the child, and it's not fair to our families." "Stop," I said. She stopped. "I've heard the rest of that sentence before," I said, "in different words and from different mouths, and it has never once been about the child. It has always been about you and what you think belongs to you, which is your idea of what this family should look like." I sat forward. "I want you to understand something. Maya is my daughter. That baby is my grandchild. And what you said to her last night in this house was not concern. It was a threat dressed up in careful language. You're being dramatic. I went through her phone this morning," I said, "with her permission. She showed me the voicemail you left her 2 weeks ago, the one she hadn't told my son about because she didn't want to upset him during the conference." My sister's hands shifted slightly in her lap. "And I called my son's office this morning before I came here," I continued. "His manager, a man named Dennis, is someone I've met twice at company events. He's a decent man. He told me, when I asked him carefully, that someone had called the HR department last month raising concerns about my son's, quote, personal situation creating potential workplace liability. Dennis said he'd ignored it because my son's record is spotless." I looked at my sister. The call came from a number registered to a woman named Patricia Gaines. Patricia Gaines is the woman who does your bookkeeping and has for 15 years. The room was very quiet. "And then," I said, "I made one more call this morning, to the County Family Services office, because Maya had a visit last week from a caseworker doing what they called a routine wellness check on expectant mothers in the area. Except Maya's name was never submitted to any county program. Someone called that office and reported a concern about her home environment. The caseworker told me, when I explained the situation, that the call had come from an anonymous tip line, but that the description of the concern used very specific language about, quote, cultural instability in the household. I let that sit. My sister had gone the color of old paper. "Cultural instability," I said. "You chose those words carefully, too. You can't prove any of this connects to me," she said. Her voice was still composed, but the steadiness in it was manufactured now. I could hear the effort. "I don't need to prove it in court," I said. "I need to be sure in my own mind, and I am. But here's what I want you to understand." I stood up. "You thought you were working quietly, the way you always do. You thought if you moved through enough different channels, nothing would trace back to you. You thought you could make my son's life difficult and my daughter-in-law's life frightening without anyone being able to point directly at you. I picked up my coat from the arm of the sofa, but you made a mistake." She waited. "Maya isn't just my daughter-in-law," I said. "She is also a journalist. She has been on medical leave from the Nashville Banner for the past 2 months to manage her high-risk first trimester. She goes back next week." I looked at my sister. She's been documenting everything since the first voicemail. Times, dates, descriptions, everything. The color did not come back to my sister's face. "Now," I said, "the way this goes depends entirely on you. Maya has no interest in writing about her private life or our family's private ugliness. She told me that herself this morning. She wants to raise her daughter in peace. She wants her husband to keep his job without interference. She wants county caseworkers to stop appearing at her door based on malicious calls." I put on my coat. "What she does not want, I can tell you with certainty, is to spend the next 20 years having her child told, in careful language or any other kind, that she is a complication." My sister looked out the window for a long moment. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "I want you to resign from the County Historical Preservation Board by end of week," I said. "That position has given you a phone tree and a platform, and you have been using both. I want that gone." I buttoned my coat. "I want you to make no further contact with my son's employer, with County Family Services, or with any other institution that touches my son or daughter-in-law's life. And I want you to understand that Maya has every date, every call, every detail in a document that she will use if she needs to. And if I do what you're asking, then this stays inside this family, which is more than you deserve." She turned back from the window and looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something move across her face that I hadn't seen there before. It wasn't remorse. My sister is not built for remorse. But it was recognition, which was enough. The recognition that the architecture she'd built around herself had a weight limit, and she had found it. I left her house and sat in my truck at the curb for a few minutes with my hands on the wheel. I thought about the way my son had looked at me on his porch the night before, with that 17-year-old patience in his face, waiting to see if I'd worked it out. I thought about Maya on the ground in the rain against that fence post, her hand flat on the post to hold herself upright, and how she hadn't cried and hadn't called out and had just sat there in the wet dark texting 3 words because 3 words was all her phone had left. I thought about my granddaughter, who was already showing up on an ultrasound image tacked to the refrigerator in my son's kitchen, little bright ghost of a shape that I'd looked at for 5 full minutes the first time I saw it. I drove to my son's house. Maya was on the couch, with her ankle elevated the way I'd left her, but she was on her laptop now, a cup of tea on the side table, looking more like herself. My son was in the kitchen making breakfast, the radio on low. It felt like a normal Saturday morning except for the wrapped ankle and the weight of the previous night still hanging in the air, and I was grateful for the normalcy of it, the stubborn, ordinary warmth of it. I sat in the armchair across from Maya and told them both what I'd found and what I'd said to my sister. My son was quiet for a long time after I finished. He stood in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel in his hand and looked at me with an expression I recognize because it's the same one I see in the mirror, the expression of a man who has learned something he already suspected and is working out what to do with the confirmation. "The HR call," he said. "I knew something happened. Dennis was strange with me for about 2 weeks, and then it passed. I didn't know why. Now you do." "The caseworker visit," Maya said. She looked at her laptop screen for a moment. I knew that didn't feel right. She was kind. She wasn't unkind. But the whole time I kept thinking, why is this happening? We never signed up for any program. She closed the laptop and looked at me. The language she used, cultural instability. I wrote it down because something about those 2 words felt deliberate. It was. Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She must have been planning this for a while." "Since the pregnancy announcement," I said. "Maybe before, and she thought it would work." Maya said this without bitterness. Just observation. The way she processes things. She thought if she made his job uncertain and made our home feel watched, we'd be off balance, or we'd move, or she'd find something. She looked at her stomach. She thought I was just someone she could manage with enough pressure. "She has managed a lot of people that way," I said. "But not you," my son said from the doorway. "I know where she keeps her receipts," I said. 67 years of watching her work. I know every move she has. Maya smiled then, small and tired and real. "I'm not going to write about this," she said. "Just so you both know, this is my family, and it stays here." She looked at me, "But I'm glad you went over there." "So am I," I said. My sister resigned from the preservation board 4 days later, citing health concerns. The county paper ran a 2-paragraph item about it that nobody paid much attention to, which was exactly how she'd have wanted it. Whether she was embarrassed, or calculating, or simply exhausted, I didn't know and didn't spend time trying to figure out. What I knew was that the phone calls stopped. The interference stopped. The caseworker did not come back. My son called Dennis and had a direct conversation about the anonymous HR complaint. Not accusatory, just clearing the air. And Dennis told him to forget it. His record spoke for itself, which it does. Life moved on the way life does, in the particular forward motion that a coming baby gives to everything, where every week is a marker and every month changes the shape of things. Maya went back to the banner in the spring. She covered 2 city council investigations and a piece on housing development in North Nashville that ran on the front page and that my son printed out and taped to the refrigerator next to the ultrasound image, which I found extremely fitting. My granddaughter was born on a Wednesday in June, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, with a full head of dark hair, and her mother's stubborn expression, and her father's hands. And when my son called me from the hospital, I was already in the parking lot because I'd driven there at 5 in the morning, when Maya's texts started coming in with a frequency that meant business. They let me in after a couple of hours. I held her in the chair by the window with the Nashville skyline behind us both, and I looked at her face for a long time. She had the particular quality that new people have, that complete newness, unwritten, not yet acquainted with what the world thinks of her, or what it will try to tell her about herself. She didn't know yet that someone in her own family had tried to make her into a problem before she had a name. She didn't know the word she'd been called before she was born. She will know someday. In the way that children of the world she's entering tend to find out, gradually, through 1,000 small and large moments, that some people will look at her and try to see a category before they see a person, that some rooms will want her to justify her presence, and some voices will use careful language to make her feel like a question that should not have been asked. But she will also know, because her parents will tell her, and because I will tell her, that before she was born, her grandfather sat in a hospital waiting room on a rainy night and refused to pretend that the people who tried to diminish her didn't know exactly what they were doing. She will know that her father once stood in a doorway with a dish towel and quiet fury, and understood everything without being told. She will know that her mother sat on a wet ground at midnight and reached for her phone and typed 3 words because she knew someone would come. There is a story in every family about what it decides to protect and what it decides to tolerate, about which people it closes ranks around when the closing matters, about whether love is the kind that comes with conditions attached to it or the kind that doesn't negotiate those conditions at all. I held my granddaughter in that hospital chair and thought about what kind of story I wanted her to have about us when she's old enough to need it, what I want her to know about where she comes from, not in the way my sister meant it, not bloodline and inheritance, and the cold arithmetic of ancestry, but in the way that actually marks a person, the stories people tell about each other when they think no one is listening. Whether they showed up in the rain, whether they told the truth even when the truth was ugly, whether they stood between someone small and the people who had decided, before she'd drawn a breath, that she was a problem to be solved. My sister sent a card when the baby was born, a standard card, the kind you buy at a pharmacy, with a teddy bear on the front. Inside, she had written the baby's name and best wishes. Nothing more. My son and Maya read it and looked at each other and put it on the counter and moved on. I thought that was exactly the right thing to do. My granddaughter will grow up in Nashville, and she will come out to my house in the summers, and I will teach her the names of every tool in my garage, the way my father taught me, and she will sit on my back porch in the evenings when the light is long and gold the way it gets in Tennessee in July. She will grow up knowing her mother's family in California and her grandmother's stories about coming to this country and building something from nothing in a language she was still learning. She will grow up knowing her grandfather's history and her grandmother's cooking and the particular hills of this county the way only people who grew up in a place can know it. She will grow up knowing she belongs to all of it, not because someone granted her permission, not because she proved herself to the satisfaction of people who were never going to be satisfied, but because her father decided before she was born that belonging isn't given, it's built, person by person and year by year, by the people who show up and tell the truth and refuse to look away from the ugly things so the beautiful things can survive. She was 4 days old the last time I held her before I drove home. She was asleep against my shoulder in the afternoon light, and I said her name quietly, just to say it. And I thought, here is the thing that was worth protecting. Here is what all of it was for. Not the confrontation in my sister's sitting room, not the documentation and the phone calls and the early morning drive in the rain. Those were just the necessary work, the unglamorous maintenance that love sometimes requires. This was the thing, this small sleeping face, this new person, this whole life that nobody's bitterness was going to be allowed to touch. I drove home on back roads through the long June evening with the windows down, and the air smelled like cut grass and coming rain, and I thought that 67 years is a long time, and I have not always used them as well as I could have, but I used some of them right. That'll do.